Shooting up in the boys' room at Dog High School, Dorkville, USA. Another West and Louie, they got something going down kinda screwy. Down to the comment? Come on and vomit. Yeah, if there's something to be on, well, you know that you'll be on it. Smack City. The skies are ugly and the girls are gray. Smack City, USA. Well, if you come as you are. And you can drop down dead inside the bar. Yeah, you can touch because I'm sick and tell me that your wife's a saint for sucking dick. Well, I'm going down to Smack City, gonna have some fun. Those are some lyrics by today's guest, Blag Dahlia, from a song called Smack City on the Dwarves record, Sugar Fix, a record that I happen to hold very close and very dear to my heart. And in the background, you can hear an untitled track from my friend Lucas Rager. This is a song that'll be on his forthcoming album, Rager. He kind of has a cool John Carpenter vibe going in this one. But enjoy the interview with Blag. I most certainly did. This will be the first of 2 December interviews on Good Art the Podcast. I'll consider them both Christmas gifts and Hanukkah gifts to you, the listener. Enjoy the interview. Thanks. Bye.
Blag the Ripper.
To accept, press 1. To send a voicemail, press 2.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Very well. How are you?
Blag from the Dwarves. Feeling good.
Groovy. So we got the Suburban Nightmare record. It's sort of surfy, sort of ghostly sounding. Like what was the transition? Like what made you decide to transition into like the Dwarves, the horror story thing, a little more like in your face, hardcore?
Well, I mean, the horror stories Dwarves was really started as like a 60s garage band. And we did a lot of covers of like 60s garage songs, which was a genre that wasn't very well known at that point, you know, and there was no internet. And so, you know, you sort of had to find out piecemeal about this old rock and roll that was not, you know, it wasn't very famous when it happened. And now it was like 20 years later and most people weren't really aware of it. So, you know, that was kind of where it started. Like it was kind of an adjunct to the punk scene or whatever was around, you know, it was sort of a small garage rock scene. And so we were kind of part of that. And then, you know, pretty quickly we saw that, you know, those bands were pretty like slavishly imitating something, you know, they didn't seem to be doing something new. Whereas like the punk bands that were around at the same time, you know, even I wasn't as into the music, but they just were kind of doing something that was theirs, you know, they weren't just trying to imitate something. And so, you know, the more we were writing our own material and doing our own shit, the more it kind of came out that way. That would be the best way to describe how the change took place. You know, it was just, there wasn't really anything in that 60s world that anybody was doing that was very interesting, except kind of imitating what had already been done, you know?
So it was kind of a natural thing. You guys are finding yourselves in this 60s sound kind of and putting your own touch on it. And then the Dwarves sort of came out of that, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think it was that. And I think it was just on a certain level, all this stuff really is the same musically, whether it's like 60s garage or punk or rockabilly, they all kind of employ similar chord progressions and approaches. It's just some little ways that things can be different.
Yeah, I get that. What about the name change? Why change your name?
Name change.
Well, from Suburban Nightmare to Dwarves.
Because we moved out of the suburbs, I guess. We had sort of Suburban Nightmare was like a joke when we were high school kids living there,
Yeah.
But soon enough, we got out of there, and it was like, okay, this isn't really going to be us anymore. And the Dwarves was a cool kind of '60s name, I was surprised nobody had used it.
Yeah. How many of you moved out of?
The whole band moved from Illinois to San Francisco in 1986.
And San Francisco was pretty much a total dump at that point, right? Violent, shitty.
I think if you were making art, it was a great place to be, because people were living together in these flats, and the costs were relatively low to live in San Francisco. There were warehouse parties. There was stuff to do. So it was pretty fertile ground if you were an artist, a musician or a poster artist or something like that. But it was, it had the urban issues of the 80s. There was fucking crime and drug dealing and, vandalism and whatever bedevils the urban metropolis, I guess,
Yeah, it seems like the artists are always the first ones to move in, and then the gentrifiers follow 15, 20 years later.
Yeah, and in San Francisco, that's really been made manifest the last few years. I mean, it's gotten to the point where there's just no scene at all, man, because anyone who really owns stuff, anybody who can afford to live here is not going out to little shows or little art shows or making little things. They're living a lot differently than that. So it's very hard for small time art to get patrons here.
So when did you guys first start getting naked on stage? Or like when did the
naked on stage? I think it was like Saltpeter started wearing the women's underwear, women's clothing, which was sort of closer to naked, And then I went all the way and just went for full nudity, or I'd do like just like a woman's sheer bottom thing to kind of hold me in a little bit. But we had seen Gibby from the Butthole Surfers play a whole show naked, and I was just amazed by it. It was such a we don't give a fuck quality. And then I started doing it, and then it sort of, he who cannot be named, the mask guy, just went one step further, and he was naked, except he had the mask, so it was a whole, like, we were kind of trying to outdo each other, going heavier and heavier with it.
And is that like where like the more sort of like violent shit, did that come after the nudity, or was that there from the beginning?
The nudity and the violence kind of went hand in hand. It's weird. It was almost sort of a G.G. Allen thing where, there was a whole sort of skinhead presence, and like there was definitely some people that would go and fuck up shows back then, but nobody wanted to get near us. We were like, some weird naked dudes, but we weren't like little guys, but we weren't, you just didn't really know what we were going to do. We weren't. We weren't like the typical sort of punk band that was afraid of everybody. We were kind of in your face, So we, the sort of violence, nudity, the craziness, it was sort of all, we just wanted to be this notorious act, and it was, we sort of threw it all in the blender to see what came out,
Yeah. Like you brought up Gibby Haynes, like I remember seeing something like they brought a motorcycle on stage and just like rev the shit out of it for the entire show. Like I like the quality of like the 80s outsider bands sort of just trying to be the most outlandish on stage and see see who would stick around and come to the next show.
Yeah, I mean, for my money, the Butthole Surfers were the best live band of the '80s. You know, they were incredible, and yeah, I mean, then the Dwarves. I think the element that was the most kind of different with us too was that most of the bands that really wanted to put on a spectacle and do a thing were not kind of record guys. You know, like we were also record guys. You know, so we. Most of the time when you had a band where there was like guys in it that knew records or new rockabilly records or new weird rock and roll records or different obscure things, they mostly just kind of did their act. And, we sort of combined all the elements. Like we were into cool, obscure records. We were also into whatever was new, but we were also into just being a weird party band, having women around, having drugs around, having sex and nudity. I mean, the whole thing, we just kind of threw it all in the pot, and it was a little too scary for most entities, and most people that liked one part of it, like they liked the 60s part of it, but they didn't like the punk part of it, or they liked the spectacle of it, but they didn't really care about the music of it, or, it was sort of hard to find people who understood the whole thing tied together,
Yeah, and you guys were in a world that, or like the scene at least, like, I think I heard you describe it as pretty asexual, and you were like bringing like the opposite.
Yeah, that I was really describing, I think, more the California punk scene that we came to. Like the various rock and roll scenes around had a dirty undercurrent to them, the clubs.
Yeah.
But then, you got to California and they had like, shortly after we came here, they started Gilman Street. We played one of the first shows there with a band called the Digits that were a great group from Illinois. But, it was like, yeah, there was a real asexual quality to the California stuff. And I think it was because it was kind of the flip side of this very decadent rock scene. When we moved here, there was this sort of hair metal rock scene,
yeah,
where there was a lot of sex, a lot of drugs, a lot of fun, and all the music sucked and was just mainstream and bullshit. And so, we had no interest in that music, but the scene was much more interesting than what was happening, in punk, where you'd get some cool bands, but it was like that whole kind of Ian MacKaye vibe of, being a nice boy and not having sex and picking up your trash after you and all that stuff, that was really uninteresting to us,
Yeah. Is that like where, is that what like Penetration Moon was? Was it some sort of like...
Well, so Penetration was, once the Dwarves kind of got established and been here for a little while and actually, it toured some, and so we signed to Sub Pop and things like that started to happen. We started getting a little more respect around here, but it was still that same deal with like punk bands weren't really getting laid, like
yeah.
I to get laid, I would go out with my long hair and go to like some hair band show and try and find a girl, So Penetration was kind of that. It was like, why can't we have a cool glam band instead of a fucking lame ass glam band that's like these LA guys? Like, so our version of a glam band was doing like, Dead Boys songs and Modern Lovers songs and Creedence type things, and we're like, yeah, I always liked glam. It was just that 80s version of it was so shitty, and it just didn't make any sense to me, So yeah, Penetration Moon was kind of like, no, yeah, we like glam too. It just has to be tolerable,
Why didn't you... That stayed unreleased for a while, right?
Yeah, there was only just a single. I mean, there was never really a band. It was just a couple of guys. We basically hung out for a summer and played some shows for a joke and got in a quick recording. And after we did the recording, the guitar player from that band was in kind of a local heroes band in San Francisco, and his band didn't like that he was playing with me. because I got busy and made records, whereas they had, I think, been fucking around for 4 years and still hadn't gone to L.A. They were waiting for Geffen Records to come and give them $1 million, and they didn't really want to travel, and it was that kind of a thing. So when his band saw that I had made a single, they were like, "You can't do this anymore." It was that kind of thing.
Oh, jeez.
There were always a lot of kind of would-be rock stars in San Francisco and L.A. And I never really did business like them. I tried to make a good record. I tried to get involved with record companies, but if you couldn't just make something, I didn't want to do it. There was a lot of people that really loved talking to people at record labels and talking to managers and talking to lawyers and trying to put big deals together. And we just never had the patience for any of that stuff,
So I want to ask about the he who cannot be named, his fake death thing. Like, where the hell did that come from? Like, whose idea was that?
Well, you say fake, man, but of course he who, he suffered, he died and was buried.
Sure.
I mean, that's, he creatures like that can only share this earth with us for a short period, and then they're gone.
Well, I honestly didn't think that it was, it had, I wasn't aware that there was a magical, mystical death there. I thought.
Yes, man. I mean, he put it all in perspective for us. When you have your dead member, you really start to figure out what's going on. There was Brian Jones, and there was fucking, there's always a dead guy.
Yeah.
Stu Sutcliffe, you gotta have a dead guy.
And it happened in Philadelphia, right?
That's right. It actually, it happened, in a bar fight in Philadelphia, which, was ironic because I think it was W.C. Fields who had said, on the whole, I'd rather be in Philadelphia. And so in this case, he who was on the whole, and there he was in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So it had to be.
Bled to death in the streets.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, Pennsylvania's a violent place.
Philadelphia. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe used to be.
Even the violence isn't what it used to be.
No, it lacks the heart, what it used to have. So I'm going to age myself here. I first heard you guys on Punk-O-Rama 3, which I think was 98. Right after The Dwarves Are Young and Good Looking came out. Or shortly thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, because that record seems to be like your second big shift, or second shift, right? Like you guys like Sugar
Yeah,
Figs.
we started garage, and then we went to a kind of form of hardcore, kind of a misfits hardcore band, and then I think by the time you get to Young and Good Looking, there's more of those elements of pop punk and stuff.
Right.
And Eric Valentine had stepped into our lives, and he was a very good producer that helped me do some of the things that I'd always wanted to do with the record sonically. So yeah, those shifts kind of took place, and Everybody's Girl, which was on that Punk-O-Rama record, that was a pretty big deal. I mean, that was how a lot of people, and like finally California, which had sort of ignored us the first 10 years we lived here, they finally picked up on us once we were on Epitaph,
Right.
That really kind of injected us into the punk rock world, getting on that label. So yeah, that was kind of the next phase of dwarfism.
And did that Did that like change your live shows? Did you get like a younger crowd showing up and like shitting themselves because it's like, holy shit, I wasn't expecting this.
Well, you know, that's a good question. I mean, I think it happens different ways at different times. At the time that those people became aware of us, they were kind of riding high. The pop punk thing had really crested and was very, Green Day and the Offspring had become huge, and a lot of that stuff was starting to get played on commercial radio,
Mhm.
and even bands like Rancid and Pennywise. And so, really, at that time, those bands were pretty into themselves. They didn't really pick up on the fact that, like, oh, wow, the Dwarves are doing what we do a little bit better. It's produced a little better. The songs are a little better, and they're a little wilder,
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I would have hoped that that would have been the case. But what was actually the case was, like, people going, wow, Green Day really is great, Wow, the Offspring really are great, I mean, it was kind of that kind of thing. We were very much a little side note to that explosion,
Yeah.
Whereas I thought we were doing a really interesting variation of it that was sure to become huge. The gatekeepers still wanted a fairly simple, straightforward thing, and the Dwarves were never that, So I think a lot of people kind of missed the boat, but a lot of people came along just because, that it was a huge tide of those kind of bands coming out, and so we kind of got raised up on that tide,
Yeah. Yeah. But you didn't see like as far as like people attending your show, did you see a shift?
Well, yeah, I mean, we got a record deal, and a lot more people started showing up, and we started being mentioned in the same breath as these other bands.
Mm-hmm.
The thing was, I'd already been part of that scene for years,
Right.
as well as part of the grunge scene. So I thought we should have been mentioned along with those bands all along.
Right.
To me, it sort of. I think the one issue with sort of commercialism in music is that everything winds up getting summed up with whatever is the most commercially viable version of it. So there were all these bands all over the country playing a certain kind of music. But then at a certain point, it just became, there's this one band, Nirvana, and there were these certain kind of bands playing a kind of poppy punk variation thing. And one day there were 100 of them, and then the next day there was just one, Green Day. You know what I mean? Like it really, it changes your perspective when you see one thing start to embody everything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, and it happens with every genre of music. At a certain point, there's a couple hundred opera singers, and then there's just the three tenors. Like at a certain point, there's 1,000 jazz bands, and then there's just Benny Goodman. I mean, it's just kind of like the music industry always does that. They have to aggregate everything to just one central point of profit, and then they move on, and there's a new genre, But for people like me that actually make music, it's much more complicated, I didn't think my whole existence was predicated on the existence of Green Day or the Offspring or Nirvana or whatever, but the music industry thought that,
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I just kept making art. I kept making interesting records regardless of the genre. I kept playing interesting shows regardless of how many people were in the crowd or whatever. You know what I mean? Like I sort of accepted, okay, I'm just going to try and make the best band that I can, with my friends. And fortunately, I had friends that were super talented and really good songwriters and performers. And so I wasn't alone in the pursuit of it. It wasn't, if you were around that scene at that time, you saw a lot of guys who were very motivated to be successful. And some of them were, But I think what I did with my group was really made a cool group, made a cool group of interesting, different people that wrote cool songs. And, it was more, it didn't get a lot of industry hype. It got the occasional pat on the head from the industry, but it didn't really get much of anything, so we just did it ourselves,
Yeah. And then, so like Dwarves Are Young and Good Looking come out, and you guys didn't put a record out for a few years. That's when you wrote your first book, right? Or at least published your first book?
Yeah, I mean, after Young and Good Looking came out, Come Clean came out a couple years later.
Right.
Which was sort of the conceptual pair with that record. And then what happened? I think, my book, Armed to the Teeth with Lipstick, which was kind of an experimental illustrated thing I did with Mark Rude, came out right around that time. Right around, 2000 or 1999 or something like that. And then, it took a while to do another record. It took until 2004 to put out Dwarves Must Die. And I put another book out called Nina sometime around 2008, 2009, something like that. So, there was a lot of regrouping then, and I put out a record. I did a record called Candy Now with a female vocalist, which was sort of showing a different side of music that I wrote and stuff like that. That was more kind of retro pop. And I also put out, what else? I think at that time, Penetration finally got mixed, and there were sort of a few old projects that got reintroduced, and that was kind of a confusing period.
I'm surprised that you say that Young and Good Looking is coupled with Come Clean, because I think Come Clean is, like, for me at least, it feels like much more of what the Dwarves are now, and like what the Dwarves Must Die is like, because you guys.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, I mean, it more plays around with the studio. It more plays around with. It's not as much a straight band record. It's more of a studio record with different people, and that's kind of true. Actually, I guess I think of them as a pair because they both initially came out on Epitaph. But I think like Young and Good Looking was me trying to figure out how to produce a record, and Come Clean was me having a better grasp of how to do it,
Yeah. Come Clean is
and getting a lot of help from guys like Eric Valentine and stuff like that,
Did you? So now we're to like the next big shift, Dwarves Must Die, where it's so much a studio album and there's so much production. Like, did you see another change there? Like,
yes, I mean, I think so. And really, that's a period where we just drop off the radar for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I mean, we just don't exist after that. Like, for a lot of people, it's like we exist when we were on Sub Pop, we exist when we were on Epitaph, and then we just don't exist anymore. But for me, again, it was that idea of like, I'd been listening to a solid diet of hip-hop records for years because rock and roll records were so disappointing. The lyrics sucked, the music sucked. It was this big, puffy, grungy thing, or else it was this kind of rap rock hybrid of like Limp Bizkit and these type of bands that were big at the time. And none of it made much sense to me. And what I was hearing in my mind, and I think what Must Die is this sort of combination of punk rock, deconstructed music like hip hop, and then kind of a return to garage rock, but sort of deconstructing that like hip hop, using garage records to loop and doing it to me, like that record is this really deconstructed thing of like punk, garage, and hip hop and experimental music plus like just throwing in the kitchen sink of guests.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like San Quinn was a rapper that lived on my block in San Francisco. So I befriended him, and you know, I went back to guys I knew from Chicago, like Nash from Urge Overkill, and you know, DJs that I'd met in California, like DJ Mars, and you know, it was just like, you know, and then that's the first one that Dexter Holland comes in and sings on, and you know, Nick Oliveri starts singing. He had played bass for me for a long time, but he starts singing on that record. And so it was really just a kitchen sink, like, what happens if you do every different genre? You know, what happens if you throw all this shit together, you know? I think it was a very ambitious, interesting record, and it was one of the last records that came out on Sympathy for the Record Industry, which was a great label run by a great guy, and you know, yeah, it was sort of a high watermark to me of how to make a great record, you know? And I think from that point on, things kind of shifted, and I just couldn't put that kind of time and money and energy into making a Dwarves record anymore. It was such an incredible, like, the amount of time and money that took was just staggering.
I mean, you can hear it, you know, and you can feel it. It's got everything, and it's produced incredibly.
Yeah, I'd like to think so, man, and I really appreciate you hearing that. You know, it's a record that doesn't get mentioned a lot, but for me, it's in my top 3 of the Dwarves. You know, I think it's kind of, you know, I love all the Dwarves records. You know, they're like my babies, but it's like, you know, Blood, Guts, and Pussy really delivers for that kind of a record. Young, Good Looking really delivers for that kind of a record, and then Must Die really delivers for that kind of a record. You know, it's like you've sort of got your most basic Misfits punk kind of record for Blood, Guts, and then, you know, a pretty basic California punk record for Young and Good Looking, and then Must Die is just this pastiche of every different style, you know. So
Yeah.
to me, those 3 records really work on their own terms, and they do what they're supposed to do, you know, and all of the other records, to one degree or another, remind me of those records, you know, and they achieve their goals in various ways, you know.
Where's Sugar Fix fall on that list?
Yeah, that one kind of got left out in the cold. I mean, it was right when Soap Pop was kind of getting rid of us.
Yeah.
And we didn't really have the budget or the know-how to do the kind of record that I was trying to make, you know, and we were really getting no help at all, and had really fallen off commercially. We weren't, you know, for a couple of years, we were like the hot live band everybody wanted to play with. But after a few kind of incidents, you know, violence and nudity and weirdness, you know, suddenly like nobody wanted to play with us. We didn't have a record deal anymore, and it was very like, you know, so Sugar Fix was kind of turned out to be an orphan. But, you know, there's some great songs on there. I mean, Anybody Out There, Saturday Night, Wish That I Was Dead, Dairy, or no, I guess Dairy Queen isn't on that one. But yeah, Sugar Fix is kind of an outlier, you know. It was sort of us trying to be more mid-tempo and do a different kind of record, but I hadn't quite figured out how to do what I was trying to do yet. I think Young and Good Looking was that, you know.
I think that's why Sugar Fix sticks out to me, because it's like, it is different, and it, like, you read reviews and it's like, well, what are the Dwarves doing right now? But
right.
For me, that album totally delivers. And my next question,
yeah, it has its adherence. It definitely has its adherence. The Fresh Prince of Darkness, who's played guitar with us for 20 some odd years now, that was the record that he loved and came in with, you know. I think it was a little more listenable, a little more rock and roll. It showed you that we could do something besides Blood Guts, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just, you know, we didn't get any real support. and I just didn't have anybody to show me the ropes in production.
Yeah.
I just didn't know.
It seems like the record that when you guys re-record songs, it's like Anybody Out There and Saturday
How to Win
Saturday
Friends
Night.
and Influence People, the
Yeah.
re-recorded version.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Is that why you re-record the tracks? Because you want?
No, that was one of those things where we were starting to get a lot of movie and TV placements at that time. And half the time, they had to go through Sub Pop or Epitaph to get our stuff, which sucked because they weren't helping us and were trying to hustle other shit that they had, and so I was just like, fuck it, let's re-record our stuff so that we have versions of our own when somebody wants something for a movie or whatever,
Smart
And
move.
those turn out to be pretty cool versions. I think How to Win Friends is a good kind of overview. And it's got a little more of a live feel. It doesn't have a lot of the overdubs and craziness that the records that it's drawn from have,
Yeah, that version of Act Like You Know on there is very tough.
Yeah. There's some great shit on there. I stand by that record. I mean, it was, it exists, It has one song that isn't anything else called Follow Me, which I think is a great Dwarves song that's largely unknown.
Yeah.
But, I think that record is a good listen down, Check out How to Win Friends. It's a pretty reasonable record.
So was your website actually hacked by Islamic terrorists?
Yes.
Yeah.
Truth is stranger than fiction thing. Our website was hacked by what they think is like an Algerian hacker collective, which probably became aware of us because we'd had a video premiere on Noisy, and they did an article at the same time in Noisy or Vice, one of those things on about this Algerian hacker collective. So they probably read about themselves and us at the same time.
Oh, okay.
They came in and did their weird ass fucking thing. I don't know. I thought that was very strange.
What did they do? I've never seen like screenshots or anything of it. Did they like?
Oh, they took over the site and put some Islamic bullshit on the front page of it, and weird music that comes up when you hit it. They seized the thing, somehow. I don't know. I'm not a big tech guy, I just hired a guy who's good at getting rid of that, and we haven't had any problems with it since then. Jesus, I mean, if you're pushing Islamic fundamentalism, I don't know what I can tell you.
Right.
I mean, it isn't the kind of thing we can really argue about. If that's where you're coming from, then we're enemies, and okay, I could accept that.
Right.
I make no excuses for Islamic terrorism. I'm not gonna apologize for it. It's just a completely fucked up thing that has nothing to do with me, and they hacked our thing. I thought it was really weird.
You gotta wonder if you got any secret Dwarves fans over there. Closeted
Let's hope so.
Dwarves fan.
Yeah, I mean, part of that whole thing is being sexually repressed, and so who knows? Maybe they jack off and look at our album covers. I couldn't tell you.
So how about Radio Like You Want? Tell me a little bit about that, because you have some awesome episodes on there with like your interview with Adam Parfrey, and got Dillinger 4 on there, Naked Ray Gun.
Yeah, Parfrey, man, that was too bad. He put out some great books with Feral House. He was really an interesting guy. Yeah, there's some good ones, and especially the very last episode of Radio Like You Want, I talked to a friend of mine, Krabby from Orange County, who was a surfer who got caught in that Bali bombing.
Oh, geez.
And he actually had to escape from the burning discotheque that most people were immolated in. If you hear that last episode, it's really fascinating, you know. But yeah, we had some very interesting ones. I talked to Sammy from Fang about his experiences in San Quentin, and you know, yeah, it was really interesting interviewing people and doing that show. I really enjoyed it for the time I was doing it. You know, it takes a lot of energy and time to put a show together, and I did it for about 3 years. So finally, it was just a little too much work, but I really enjoyed it. I'd love to do something like that again, you know.
Yeah, it seems like there was a while there you were kind of getting some broadcast shit out. Like, what was that? Like punk.
That's right, and we there was a cool advice show that me and a DJ from up here did together called We Got Issues. That ran on iTunes for another year and actually was played on commercial radio some on KFOG here in San Francisco. And that was cool. It was like an advice show. I really enjoyed doing broadcasting. It's just kind of a sort of a weird thing. I mean, similar to music where they stopped paying you, and writing that I do, which they stopped paying you for. Broadcasting is the same kind of thing, you know. People just podcast for free and that's it. You know, it's like there's a lot of the things that I'm good at, they just don't pay people for anymore. You know? So it's very hard to get a handle on what you can get paid for, you know, because I'd love to sit around and broadcast. And, you know, somebody's getting paid to do it, but, you know, with those podcasts, you sit around and you work a lot, but you don't get anything for it. So it's kind of like after a while, it's like, all right.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. Is Blag a persona, or is that you?
I think it's both, you know. I think everybody's got a little Blag in them, you know, but it certainly doesn't define everything I do. But it's you'll always find him lurking somewhere behind whatever the real me is doing, you know. So it's pretty impossible to tell the difference between the two half the time.
All right, I'm gonna end on this last one. What's up with the Bono picture hidden on your website in the little history section? Is there a story behind that?
Bono. It's probably, that history section is funny. I was probably alluding to some apocryphal meeting between us and Bono. I never actually met the guy. I'm sure he's pretty interesting, but I think he's got bigger fish to fry than me.
Yeah. All right. Are you guys getting to the East Coast anytime soon?
Well, you know, it's been a little while, but we're going to do Pouzza Fest this year out in Montreal, so I'm hoping that we make it to the rest of the East Coast around that time. I think that would be fun. But yeah, it's been a little while. We got to get back to Pittsburgh and New York and Boston and all those spots again.
Yeah, I missed you guys the last time you were here because I had broken 2 ribs and I was afraid to go. I was afraid.
Oh man.
I was afraid that I'd get fucked up.
We've been playing Pittsburgh for a long time. It's a great town, so we shall return.
All right. Well, thank you, Blag the Ripper.
Man, no problem. Send me a link to this, you know.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
And we shall see you.
All right, man. Thanks for chatting.
You got it, man. Don't forget the Dwarves.com. We'll see you.
All right, folks. That is the end of my interview with Blag the Ripper. Episode 7 of Good Art the Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I have one more interview coming out in December, and unfortunately, we can't open it until Christmas, but I am very excited to release this one. Have a good night.